present probably a very different angle than you, Roger, which is basically from the introductory programming education. My name is Natalie Kiesler. I'm from the Leibniz Institute for Research and Information in Education, Frankfurt, Germany. I'm a postdoc, and I did a lot of research in programming competency in the past couple of years. I also joined a industry working group with Mats 2 years ago on competencies. So yeah, I investigated curricula, teaching and learning processes. I'm very interested in pedagogy, learning and teaching. So that's going to be my perspective today. I have prepared the following agenda for you today. And I'm happy that I included the introduction slide because I figured that not everyone is from the context of introductory programming education today. So I'm glad I did that. I'm going to present a couple of related works, which you probably heard of. And then I want to present 2 studies I conducted in the first half of this year. The first one is about the performance of large language models, mostly ChatGPT, in introductory programming tasks, and want to talk about the results we have here. And the second study I did with a few colleagues of mine was about the feedback LLMs can provide. So we wanted to look into the quality of that feedback actually, and analyze that. And based on these 2 studies I conducted, I want to talk about the implications for students' competencies and the competencies we expect from them. But also educators' competencies, because these 2 components have to fit together well for students to succeed. So we must not forget the educator side on that. And I'll conclude with a few points that are up to discussion and point out some of the great potential for future work, because there is a lot. Okay, so as I mentioned, my perspective is introductory programming education. And prior to the introduction of large language models, and even up to date, we are facing several challenges here, because we have a lot of we have super high student numbers, about 800,000 students in introductory programming classes, which is crazy. It's very hard to support them individually. It's very hard to give them feedback. But they need that to get experience. They need to program. But when they are stuck, what should they do? So if they need help, we need to help them, but we can't do it on an individual level. So we see that growing demand for support in introductory programming. But at the same time, we know that current learning environments, so those prior to ChatGPT, have very limited feedback options. That was one of the key results from the 2022 industry working group on feedback, which I fortunately was able to join. And then we saw the introduction of ChatGPT in late November 2022 as a very easily accessible, or seemingly accessible, powerful tool to create code. And that was totally new, a big change. And many people were uncertain what to do with that. And the good thing was that research started like that. So I have never experienced that before in the community, that we've seen so much research. And the first studies showed that there was an interesting performance. So Finney Ansley, you see the first studies here on the slide, showed that there's a promising performance, that the LLM was able to generate code explanations, could analyze errors in introductory programming tasks. So, of course, there was this need to explore this tool further because it seemed very promising. And that is what a lot of my dear colleagues did. I just have a glimpse of related work here. So there's a lot out there, which I'm sure you know. The first important works were from Finney Ansley et al., who analyzed the potential of codecs to solve tasks in CS1 and CS2 courses successfully. Brett Becker, I know you're on the call. Hi, Brett. You talked about educational opportunities and challenges, which is very important. We also have a study by Majid Kazemi-Tabah et al., who was investigating students' performance who were practicing with and without an LLM, and he could show that there were good results in both groups. And we also know that LLMs can be used by educators quite successfully, for instance, to help you generate new tasks, right? Which is very hard to do and takes a lot of time. But LLMs can also help with code explanations. And then there's a new area that comes up actually, which is prompt engineering, and we have to talk about that today, I think, because it really depends on the input, what you get as an output, of course. And then we also had a great IDICE working group this year, which explored the implications of LLMs on curricula, learning objectives, ethics, educators, student learning, students' perceptions, academic integrity, and many, many other aspects. It's available on Archive already. I can highly recommend it because it covers so many aspects. But still, there are many, many open questions which we need to address, because there's a lot of stuff we do not know yet about these LLMs, and also there's little classroom experience. So we actually do not know how the students use the LLMs, all of them, and we also do not know how companies use LLMs and how this is going to evolve. So it's very exciting. It's a very exciting field and a lot of potential for research, of course. So what my colleague, one of my colleagues and I started with is we wanted to look into the mere performance of these LLMs. And this study and the one I'm presenting next, that took place in parallel. So in case you're wondering, and they were motivating each other, so to say. The first one was about, the mere performance, as I said, of ChatGPT 3.5 and the 4 version, which appeared at that time. And we wanted to see how ChatGPT would solve introductory programming tasks, namely those that are very standard or perceived as standard. For this reason, we selected tasks which were published on CodingBat in the Python area. There were 72 tasks, and we simply requested ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 to generate a solution by just using the task description as an input. And what we did then was we evaluated the output by inserting the output back into CodingBat and see how that would run, how that would go. And then we summarized the performance in the unit test, so to say. And I want to show you one of the outputs ChatGPT 3.5 generated. Was pretty straightforward. We didn't even ask for code specifically, but we received it in almost all cases. And what is also interesting, I think, is that it provides so many comments in the code, which is, I would say, pretty good for beginners because they can understand the code line by line. And it's like a model solution. So that was pretty scary to see because my co-author, Daniel Schiffner, and I, we thought like, okay, are we done? It seems so, because this is like as good as it gets, right? We then pasted it back into CodingBat, and that was the screen we received in most cases, all correct. Most results were indeed perfect. And what I want to show you next is like a summary of the performance results for these, 7 or 8 areas in which these 72 tasks were grouped, like warm-up, 1, 2, string, list, logic, and lists. And you can see that there are only 3 or 4 tasks in which the models did not succeed on the first attempt. We still saw some hallucinating replies in the 3.5 version, which we didn't see in the version 4 anymore. So that one, if you would put in a follow-up prompt, say, hey, this is not correct, it would give you the right answer right away in the second attempt. You see the performance difference is not significant, so it solves the task in the first attempt in 95% of the cases. Pretty scary, kind of, or maybe not. We will talk about that. So I also looked at the cases where the LLM did not succeed on an instance, because that were the interesting ones, right? And I found that the task descriptions contain syntactic ambiguity. So yeah, easy as that. So I might have not been able to solve them correctly because it was ambiguous. And that's very interesting. And I'd like to ask you to keep that in mind for our discussion. And what I also need to say here is that the coding bed tasks are well known. They are on the web. There are model solutions available on GitHub. So the models might have been trained on them. So I need to tell you this. Yeah, because that shows us that the LLMs are not necessarily smart. They are regenerating what they've been trained on. So it is very likely that they've seen these tasks. Okay. So yeah, does this mean that we have to change everything now? Well, maybe, maybe not. And at the same time, I would like to see this as a chance for us to think about what we do with students. Is it really the best way to have these standard tasks and repeat them every year? Or shouldn't we maybe use this as a chance to transform education? Because yeah, repeating the same task every year, just checking the output, what the student submits, if it compiles, I don't know, is that really the best way of teaching and enhancing learning processes? Maybe not. So keep that in mind. I'm looking forward to the discussion. And that was also the motivation for that other study I wanna briefly introduce today, because together with my colleague Hieke Koenig from Utrecht University and Dominic Lohr from Friedrich Alexander University in Germany, we wanted to look more into the quality of the feedback, and we wanted to start investigating how a student would use this LLM, because we thought that they would likely use their input, put it into the LLM, and then ask what's wrong with my code. So we wanted to investigate that angle and that use case, which is very different from what we did in that other study, where we were really lazy by just putting in the task descriptions. But if a student would want to use an LLM to get formative feedback, they would likely do that and maybe insert their own solution, which probably contains errors, but they might want to use it to get feedback. So we wanted to explore how we could use LLMs to generate formative feedback. And we wanted to see what output is generated and how we could characterize that feedback in terms of quality and content and which other components are delivered. Because in many cases, if you would put in your code, you would get a long output, and it has many components, and it's very hard to predict, of course, what you would get. So we wanted to start developing categories for that. And we started by selecting 4 tasks from an introductory programming course at the Friedrich Alexander University in Germany. So we took 1 task from every week of the first 4 weeks from a CS1 class with 300 students. And then we were starting to explore student solutions for these 4 tasks, which contained like more than 1 error, and where the length of the solution did not exceed 15 lines of code. So we had some inclusion, exclusion criteria, and we had selected a variety of student solutions with different errors, and we wanted to explore how the LLM would respond to that. And we put it in, we used it as an input, accompanied with a prompt, what's wrong with my code, because we thought that's probably what the student would do. And then we regenerated the output 3 times to see what degree of variety would be there. And then we started to develop inductive categories based on the material, to characterize the output. And what I want to show you next is an overview, like an excerpt of the overview of the criteria we use to characterize this output. So don't be scared. I'm going to explain this. The full table is actually even bigger, but it didn't fit on the slide. But I wanted to give you the idea of what we did and in which detail we did it. Let's see if that works. So here you can see, oh no, okay, but no problem. You can see that for every student response we used as an input, we had these 3 regenerated outputs. So this is why you have 3 points, three circles in every column. And then we analyzed the output with regard to content, quality, and some other criteria. And for the other category, we had the category metacognitive feedback and motivational feedback, which was something we did not expect at all, because there were some nice human-like comments like, oh, I hope this helps, or I hope this is helpful in there, which I didn't expect at all. And there were also some metacognitive strategies on how to proceed, like, oh, don't forget to test your code. So this is something new that came up here. And what was interesting about the quality, so this is what you have on the right half of the table, is that not all of, or that, many of the outputs compile actually. So that's the comp row, where you see the full circles, the black circles. But in the next column, you see the misleading information contained column. There you see also a lot of full circles. So we classified the output as misleading for novices if there was information missing, or too much information, too complex information, which the novice probably hadn't heard of before. And you see that this depends a lot for the different tasks. So the last task, where you see the first three rows here, was the negative Fibonacci sequence, and there were much more, but they didn't fit in here. There's a lot of black circles here for the misleading information, because the LLM, for example, wanted to provide iterative solutions, but the task asked explicitly for a recursive solution. They didn't get the base cases right, stuff like that. And the LLM also insisted on its own solution, so totally misleading. And so actually, it's still challenging to use LLMs like ChatGPT to get feedback. The good thing is, though, that it does contain a lot of or frequent textual explanations of the cause of the errors, textual explanations of the fix of the errors. It does contain code in a lot of cases, but not as reliably as I would have thought after the other study, because there was code in every output, and here it wasn't. There were a few remarks on styles. As you can see here, stylistic suggestions. It was also, and that was interesting, requesting more information, which is the first column, which is also something I did not expect. So it was saying, oh, without more context, I cannot help you. Also interesting. And as you can see, of course, even within the 3 regenerated replies, it does deviate. So it's not the same for all regenerations, which made us doubt the reliability, of course, of the output. You never know what you would get if you use it. This was a work in progress, which we presented at Frontiers in Education conference. And we have a lot of follow-up work to do here, because we are not fully satisfied with what we found, and we would want to investigate how we could trigger a certain type of feedback, for example. Because if you cannot use it in this directed manner, it's very hard to predict what you would get if you ask it for help. And I think
was this 3.5 or 4?
This is 3.5.
Oh,
yeah, because we had to start the submission this early in the year, so I know there was a more recent version out there, but then we generated it. Yeah, I know. Yeah, good question. Thank you. And I'd love to talk more about it because it was really interesting. But now I want to have a look at the implications of these 2 studies on students and educators' competencies. And I know I won't be able to talk about all of them, but just a few. And I took some time to think about the competencies it would take from students to successfully use these LLMs like ChatGPT. And I noted down the competencies which we mostly implicitly expect from them. And it's a shame that it's implicit, because it should be explicit, but it isn't. Most of them are not explicit. So first of all, we need the student to understand the task description and figure out if there's syntactic ambiguity contained or not, and what does it mean. Students need to be able to express also other task limitations the educator might impose on them, like some of our students are not allowed to use external libraries or certain libraries, and there are other like general limitations which an educator might impose on students, which are not in the task description. So they need to verbalize that and think of that. And that is mostly the new thing here, is that students need to be able to analyze the output that is generated by ChatGPT, and they need to be able to evaluate it, which is more than understanding, and that's the important point. So they need to not only trace the code, they need to predict the outcome of the given code. If there is code, there might only be a snippet, and that's when it gets really tricky, because you have to integrate that into your own solution, and that's something that hasn't been there in the past, or rarely, I would say, maybe from a TA or so, but this is really new. And they would have to check whether the solution is correct, if it compiles, check if the style that is used complies with the style guide your educator might have, or the style guide you're using. And you have to check back if it really is a solution that fits to the task and the other limitations you have in your class. And then you might have to develop follow-up prompts, which will not lead you down the rabbit hole, but towards the right solution. And I don't know if a novice is capable of doing all of that. And I don't think they should be, because they have educators on their side. I would say we need to be very careful, and it would be better to help students, guide them on that way. Because I doubt if we leave them alone, it might only make the good students better, and the ones who need help might be left alone. And this is something we should sincerely consider and avoid. And this is only one aspect, of course, and I'm not fully aware of the accessibility. I mean, there is a pay model available, the GPT-4. You have to pay for it. Not everybody can do that, can afford it. So we need to keep in mind the equity perspective and diversity. And these are only some of the things we should and want to discuss today, right? There are also at the same time, of course, implications on educators. I've heard debates where some educators said, "Oh, now I have to make my task more tricky or more complicated, so the LLM wouldn't get it or wouldn't understand it as quickly." Please do not do that. I do not want to encourage anyone to do that, because students are our target group and we want them to understand our tasks. So educators need to be even more cautious, perhaps, to express their tasks without ambiguity, and be very transparent about their limitations and their instructions and what they really expect from students. I would also argue that educators need to know how LLMs work, how they generate their output, what are their limitations, and be aware of the rapidly increasing potential of LLMs in the classroom, and especially in introductory programming. So ignoring them doesn't seem as a good option. And some dispositional aspects I did not want to exclude today. Educators, of course, also have to be open to change, be adaptable to new tools, new technologies. This tool is not going to go away. So this is why I would argue we should acknowledge its existence in the classroom, and also introduce it actually to students, because as I said, if we leave them alone, we will have these, I guess we will have a divide that even increases, and we do not want to see that. And for educators to be able to help students, actually, they need to have experience in using that LLM by themselves. So what I would say is that educators should, be a role model, be a model, use it, gain experience in using it, because as I said, you need to evaluate its output. You need to know what it offers. You need to know how to use it. And in order to do that, you need experience by yourself. So that's what I would like to encourage everyone. I know my time is almost up, so I have to come to the last few slides where I want to summarize a few aspects. I know there's a lot more to say here. So first of all, yes, ChatGPT can solve introductory programming tasks very well if you just put in the task description. If it's a task that is well known, that works. 95% correct result, good for you. It also has the potential to address some of learners' informational needs because, as you saw in the table, there's a lot of feedback it offers. It offers individual textual explanations of the error, how to proceed. It gives you strategies, what to do. It gives you code or code snippets. So that's more than other learning environments currently offer, which are still somewhat limited with respect to the feedback types, which is what we saw in the 2022 IDC working group led by Johan Joering. But there's a big but, because the output still greatly varies on the prompt, varies on the task. There's misleading information contained in the output, so it's hard to tell what you get, or it's hard to tell what the novice would get, and you cannot control that, of course. Educators need to support students using these tools, should not ignore them. And I'm very curious right now, because this is a very interesting time. I would hope us to see a greater focus on students' competencies, on teaching, learning, assessment, instead of ticking off the student code submission if it compiles. So it would be great if we could use this as a chance to change assessment formats, to maybe have more oral exams, have students talk about their code instead of just submitting something that was written by an LLM or another student, because that happened in the past. So this is a chance at the same time for a transformation. I would hope us to put more emphasis on talking about code, understanding code, reading code, predicting the output of code, evaluating code that has been produced by LLMs. So these are a lot of learning activities we can have, because now we have a tool that helps us as educators generate this stuff. And of course, there's the big question, how can we ideally prepare students to use these LLMs? And this is something that is a task for us as educators, I would say, and we need to address it in the near future. So there's a lot of future work. I mentioned the most important ones, I think, and also some of the ones I'm working on, which is like, how can we manipulate the prompts to get a certain type of feedback that would be very helpful to use as an input to students. If we could tell them, hey, this is the prompt, then you will get a feedback without the model solution. I can recommend that. That would be great. We would also like to reduce the amount of misleading information in the output. That would be very helpful. And of course, we all need to investigate how we can guide students to effectively or safely use LLMs. And we are also, there's also a question we could ask, like, how could this tool even be helpful to broaden participation in CS1 classes? Because I'm sure there's a lot of students who could learn programming, or who do not need to learn programming to such an extent as a CS major. We also have non-majors, maybe biologists or physicists, who only need to learn some code to analyze their data. So maybe this is a chance to broaden participation. And I'm also wondering how accessible this technology really is. So I'd like to hear more from you maybe today, or get the chance to do some follow-up on that. Okay, and that's it for now.